Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to 2020 GRESB Real Estate Result. I have to say, CBRE is delighted to host this year's event, which will provide insight to environmental, social, governance performance of real estate portfolios across Asia Pacific. The COVID-19 has captured our attention this year, but we shouldn't lose sight on climate changing issues. Our region in Asia Pacific is particularly vulnerable to the environmental risks that come with rapid urbanization, from air pollution, energy consumptions, to traffic congestions. With real estate is account for 40% of global carbon dioxide emission, it's super important for us to work together and to reduce its impact on the environment. This unprecedented change has highlighted the importance of creating a resilient, future-proof portfolios. I have to say, embracing sustainability is one key way for us to achieve this mission. We believe that pandemic will accelerate the development of WELL and LEED certified buildings across Asia Pacific. Based on CBRE's analysis, we do see Greater China and Australia are leading this trend. With employee health and well-being now as the top priorities for all the corporates, our corporate occupiers are increasingly putting a premium on properties with sustainability and wellness features. As enhanced hygiene policies become a permanent features of our workplaces, there will be an increasing focus on the quality of indoor air, the natural light, and some healthy food options. But if we look at the investment front, we also are seeing a stronger demand and emphasis for properties with green and sustainable futures. Investors are looking for that. These are all very positive and encouraging signs, but more need to be done. According to the IPCC, we have a fair chance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We need to achieve net zero CO2 emission by 2050. Today, I just saw the news. Japan just announced their ambition today to reduce the net zero CO2 emission by 2050. For real estate industry, it means that net zero energy buildings are the future. It will be a huge challenge to implement this across our region. As a result, it does require all of us to work together, also require the drastic transformations when it comes to how we design the building, how we construct the building, and how we operate the buildings. But this unprecedented time requires unprecedented measures, which bring us today's conversation on sustainability, ESG principles, and climate change resilience. I do hope you will find these panel discussions both engaging and insightful as we work together to create a more sustainable environment, not only for us and for our many generations to come. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the session.
Thank you very much, Henry, for providing that introduction. We're certainly living in interesting times from this point. And I'd really say, from our perspective, we've seen COVID-19 strengthening investors' conviction in the importance of addressing sustainability risks. And in Asia, I'd say capital market adoption of ESG and green finance and sustainable practices has really been accelerating sharply. I've actually been tracking progress from Singapore for about a decade now, and I sort of placed the tipping point in around 2016, but there's clearly been an acceleration in the last couple of years, particularly this one. And of course, climate change is a critical area. As Henry just mentioned, we've seen significant regional strengthening there. And if we track back through the year and think about COVID and recovery packages, the EU was, I'd say, the region that first started to link sustainability themes to the COVID recovery packages. And in fact, when we had our infrastructure launch event, we heard some research that highlighted that in the Asian region, ESG wasn't being, or green wasn't being so linked to the recovery and stimulus packages. On the other of course, we've this raft of new climate change targets and carbon neutrality targets for 2060 for China, for 2050 for Japan and South Korea. So it's definitely an exciting and an interesting time in the region. So today, we're going to hear first from GRESB on the results of the 2020 real estate assessment. And this is going to show continued strong growth in participant numbers, improvements in management approach, and better performance on the key metrics. These results set a baseline for the way in which investors are managing and measuring ESG in their investment and assessing the ways in which asset managers are implementing and establishing processes for ESG management. Then we'll switch to hear perspectives from parties in Asian real estate markets. First, the managers will share on how they've implemented management practices on ESG before moving to the potentials and pitfalls of looking at ESG management data, how to gather it, interpret it, and also how to improve performance. Final panel will look to investors and financiers and listen to insights from them into their requirements and expectations in line with their responsible investment strategies. So ultimately, it's improved performance, ESG performance we want across the industry in order to solve both acute and chronic environmental and social issues and risks. We want to make sure that Asia comes through the current shocks of the pandemic and recession and is able to build resilience and adaptivity to long-term stresses when it does so. We don't want to have a recovery that then sows the seeds for the next crisis. Just before switching to the 2020 GRESB results, some housekeeping rules. We're very keen to interact with you during the session, so we invite you to submit any questions you may have via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. We will try to answer incoming questions during two panel sessions. Also, please note this webinar will be recorded and the recording will be published on the GRESB website. And finally, if you have any issues with audio or video, please let us know via the chat function, also at the bottom of your screen. And so, without any further comment, I'd like to hand over to Christina and Ruben to present the 2020 GRESB real estate results highlights. Christina and Ruben.
Thank you for the introduction, Benjamin, and Henry, by the way, as well. And thank you all for dialing in for this results event for Asia. Typically, we do this in many different cities and countries around Asia. We now do it virtually, but hopefully we can have a just as insightful and exciting program for you today. Indeed, as Ben already said, 2020 has been quite a year so far, but the end is nigh. And that's not meant as an apocalyptic announcement, but rather, indeed, the year is coming to a close. And as we've heard just now from Benjamin and Henry, but also later on from the panelists, it has really been an unprecedented and extraordinary year for GRESB, for our stakeholders, but also, of course, for the world at large. Staying close to home, GRESB implemented some long-planned changes to its assessment, really with the aim to increase transparency on environmental, social, and governance, or ESG issues, and specifically focusing on the real estate sector. And these changes allow us to lay the foundation to better assess and drive ESG performance outcomes. And we know there's quite some challenges to generate those outcomes in order to solve some of the larger issues that we are facing currently. So as a hectic 2020 comes to an end, let's have a look at how the real estate globally, and more specifically here in Asia, performed on key ESG aspects, as measured by the annual GRESB real estate benchmark. So I would now like to give the word to my colleague in Amsterdam, Christina. Christina, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well, and thank you again for joining us today. I will start out by showing you some statistics on the participation this year and how it has evolved over the years as well. Here on this graph, you can see the total participation this year, totaling to 1,229 entities. Despite all of the challenges that this year has brought us, we have seen an increase in the size of the benchmark by 22%. It would never cease to amaze me how so many participants were actually able to complete the GRESB assessment from home, which I can imagine has been the majority of those 1,229 entities. Zooming on to Asia, the total number of participants benchmark this year was 187. This is a 20% increase compared with last year, which is close to the global average increase across all regions. Majority of the participants this year come from Japan, a total of 85, with an increase of 27% compared to last year. But a significant increase can also be observed in China, where participation grew by 75%. Looking at participation from a different angle, here you can see the total number of assets that were reported. More than 96,000 assets were reported worldwide that are located in more than 64 countries. This totals to a value of $4.8 trillion US, which is spread across the world. The Asian market has had a participation increase in the number of entities of 20%, but this has brought a more substantial increase in the number of in the market value that this is being represented. The market value has increased by 30%, reaching almost $1.2 trillion US, which is close to our biggest market in terms of participation, Europe. The increase in number of participants is also accompanied by an increase in the GRESB investor member base. This year, more than 120 investor members use the GRESB data to inform their investment decisions. And in total, they hold more than $28 trillion US of assets under management. I'll focus now on some of the main highlights of the 2020 results. Yesterday, we also published our online page where we will continue populating more interesting analysis and insights based on this year's data set. So here you can see a familiar image to most participants and most investors. This is the GRESB model. The model is the same as the one that we have shown in previous years, but with some notable changes. The structural changes that we implemented to the assessment that Ruben already mentioned have resulted in a change in the way that data is reported. Namely, the GRESB assessment was split into management, performance, and development components. Here in the GRESB model, you can see the standing investment benchmark, which is formed by the management and performance models. Regional dynamic of scores, you can see continues to lead the global average with 77% with 77 points average score, followed by Asia with 72 points. Both of these regions are ahead of the global average of 70. Another interesting thing to note here is that you can see those tiny little gray dots that represent every single participant in the benchmark. In previous years, the trends that we have seen were that most of them were narrowing down on that top right quadrant. Now you can see that a lot of them continue to perform very well on management with the high density in the upper part of the chart. But on the performance side, you can see a wider spread throughout the universe. Zooming in on Asia, the country in the region that performs the best is Singapore, with an average score of 78. This is followed by Japan with an average score of 75. These values, although impressive, have to be taken with a grain of salt, as we previously saw that the sizes of the benchmark in the different countries vary drastically. Looking now at the average GRESB aspect scores, here on this graph you can see a comparison between the Asia region in yellow and the green line that represents the global average. The advancement that the Asia market has in front of the entire benchmark is mainly expressed on the performance side with the water, GHG, energy, and waste component aspects. On areas of improvement for the Asian market would be the verification and assurance of performance data, as well as the improvement and wider acceptance practices. The structural changes that I mentioned were also reflected in the development benchmark. In the past, developers used to complete the GRESB developer assessment, which was composed of pure developers only. This year, due to the changes in the structure of the assessment, the development benchmark now consists of all pure developers, as well as those entities that have development activities, as well as are responsible for the management of assets. Here on the graph, you can see the difference between the performance of pure developers versus the entire development benchmark. You can see that on the management side, the wider development benchmark performs better than developers. A way to interpret that would be that entities that do both standing investments and development activities have higher control over their assets and have more overarching policies that that control the ESG management of both their standing investments and their development activities. Another notable difference would be the building certification section, where a lot of developers score higher and certify a lot of their developments. Another way of looking at the GRESB scores would be breaking down the performance by sector. We often get asked, how do different property types perform in the GRESB assessment? On this graph, you can see that for the Asia region, as well as globally, majority of the sectors perform more or less the same. A notable exception here is the residential sector, where the reporting of asset level data has been proven to be a challenge. This is something that we are aware of, and we are looking forward to engaging more with the industry in the following months to make sure we come up with a suitable solution for the residential sector. Now, having a deeper dive in the performance outcomes, here on the graph, you can see the energy intensities, as well as the like-for-like change at the bottom. In terms of energy intensities, you can see that the Asia region performs better than the global in almost all property sectors. Please note that this data is based on assets that have been reported with 100% data coverage only. In addition, you can see the like-for-like decrease across both energy, GHG emissions, and water. After last year, we observed a global increase in energy consumption. We are very happy and pleased to see that this year this has shifted with a significant in energy, greenhouse gas emissions, and water, both in the Asia region as well as globally. The energy and GHG emissions in the Asia region have decreased significantly more than the global one, with the GHG emissions globally decreasing by 3% compared to 4.3% in the Asia region. The rest of the world is a little bit ahead in terms of the decrease of water consumption, but nevertheless, this is still a positive change. Looking at building certifications, we are very happy to see that 34% of the floor area reported in Asia has actually been certified with a green building certificate. This is a very high value compared to the global average of 22%. The only other region that has a higher floor area certified is Oceania with 47%. Looking at the breakdown of common schemes that are used in the region, DBJ Green Building Certification is leading with 42% of the certified area being accountable for it, followed by GRESB, LEED, and BCA Green Mark. I'm looking forward to the discussion later to see why and how is this a driver for performance. Until now, I focused mainly on the performance and the main real estate assessment. However, it is also important to note the importance of ESG transparency and disclosure. The GRESB Public Disclosure Assessment is a measure of transparency for listed companies. And here you can see that the Asia region is overwhelmingly represents our universe. It is also responsible for the highest number of entities that have achieved an A level, which is the highest level of ESG disclosure. Focusing now on the relationship between performance and disclosure, here you can see on the graph the correlation between the GRESB assessment score from the main assessment and the public disclosure score from the public disclosure assessment. You can see a positive correlation between performance and ESG transparency, with an even higher and more intense impact in the Asia region. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll hand it over back to Ruben.
Thanks, Christina. Those were some truly very fascinating. So now let's have a look at what the key ESG trends for our industry will be going forward. Next slide, please. And as already mentioned, clearly climate change is more on top of mind than ever. And as we've learned from the COVID response, we now also know that taking a science-based approach to problem solving will actually help us tackle climate change, although it's called one of the biggest challenges of our time. But there are certainly reason to be hopeful, as the transition to net zero carbon has already begun. And as Ben mentioned, countries such as China, Japan, and Korea, and more recently Hong Kong, which are Asia's top economies, but also one of the larger emitters of carbon, have recently announced exciting decarbonization targets. And I'm sure we'll hear more about those targets later during the panel session. And actually, we already received a question around what do these targets mean for property companies and investors in Asia. Meanwhile, we can also start to see the first contours of leadership by GRESB participants, with some companies and funds already operating at net zero. And at the same time, we're seeing an increasing number that have committed to become net zero in the near future, or that have set science-based targets to do so. So it's obvious that we still have a long way to go, but it's also clear that the transition has begun. Next slide, please. So interestingly, both this transition as well as the recent pandemic have showed us the massive impact of shocks and stresses on the Asian economy, communities, and of course the real estate sector. It has also reminded us of the need to rapidly scale up investments in resilience, as this will allow us to better manage and mitigate the impact from future shocks. And the reason that this is important to our industry, the real estate sector, is not just because acute shocks and long-term stresses, including climate change, impact our cities, buildings, and communities, but also because they directly affect investment outcomes, and which is why they are material to investors. As a result, real estate investors are now assessing the ability of their managers to plan for and respond to the shocks as well as the long-term stresses. And this is illustrated by a year-on-year growth of over 70% in participation in the GRESB Resilience module. And please stay tuned because we're currently working on the analysis and we'll release the full resilience results on our website shortly. Next slide, please. At the same time, the pandemic has also created urgency for asset owners to pursue responsible investments, contribute to solutions to these big challenges, and generate positive social and environmental outcomes. And there's a clear recognition that the Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, can act as a guide, or perhaps even better, as a blueprint to the global response to these challenges, because they will ensure that nobody is left behind, both developed economies as well as developing economies. And estimates by OECD indicated almost $7 trillion of investments into our built environment are needed each year until 2030 to meet the SDGs as well as to meet the Paris Agreement. Which is why we are expecting to see more capital from institutional investors, but also family offices, governments, development banks, flowing to green buildings and sustainable real estate portfolios. And also more green bonds and other green finance instruments in our sector as well. Next slide, please. And as mentioned, and also as we'll probably hear in the second panel from Yumi, we see an increase in a number of green and sustainability-linked loan deals. And these are just some examples of recent deals that were done in Asia over the last year that use GRESB data to set ESG performance targets. And not just performance targets, but also performance improvement targets. So these and other green finance instruments, all backed by high quality ESG data specific to the real estate sector, will give trust and confidence to investors, asset owners, and of course, the companies and the managers. It ensures their money is going to projects and buildings that meet environmental, social, and resilience needs, and that contribute to achieving both the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. Next slide, please. So what's next? We don't have a crystal ball, but we can say that as an extraordinary year comes to a close, it doesn't mean that it's the end of our journey. As mentioned, there's a long way to go and we have much work ahead of us to ensure we can make a just transition to sustainable real assets. But as they say in China, "Du mi bu chang lin, ten chang bu chang yin." Single tree does not make a forest, string does not make a sound. Really, our combined efforts are required to advance towards the collective goal of improved ESG performance in our sector. And the recently announced new governance structure of GRESB will definitely help us achieve this goal by creating deeper industry involvement, while also ensuring future independence of the GRESB standards. So hereby, thank you for collaboration and for your continued support through this exciting period of change and transition. Now, what we would normally do during our live in-person events is a formal handover and recognition of the regional sector leaders. As we are doing this online, I will try to put on the proper attire. There we go. As we will now reveal the 2020 sector leaders, both globally and regionally from Asia. You can see their logos here. Also go to our website, as Christina mentioned, because we released the public results as well, with way deeper insights and breakdowns into the 2020 GRESB results, but also with lots of information in terms of the sector leaders, both globally and regionally, and both for Asia as well as the other regions. Either way, on behalf of the full GRESB team and actually on behalf of the full industry, congratulations to an extraordinary leadership to these great companies that participate in the annual GRESB assessment. Congratulations. Back to you, Ben.
Thank you very much, Ruben. So, Ruben, I noticed that there's a couple of questions in the chat here that relate very much to sort of GRESB scoring methodology and processes, and I wondered if you wanted to pick up some of those before we go ahead to the panel.
Yeah, sure. Perhaps Christina can help answer some of.
So
yeah,
the first one was, yeah, sure, go for it.
So I see one of the questions that have been asked is what is a standing investment and what is a development, especially when we do not manage the development, which score is relevant for us. So it would really, a standing investment is an asset that is already operational. It has tenants and it's income generating, while a development asset is one that is a project in construction technically. And normally for pure developers, the income from development assets comes from the sale of the asset rather than the income generation part. So if your entity operates assets and the main source of revenue is from the rent generated from these assets, then the standing investment benchmark would be more applicable. So this would be the combination of management and performance. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I can also see a question around the structural changes to the assessment that we introduced this year. So in previous years, there was one assessment that covered 7 different aspects, and then optionally a new development and major renovation aspect. This year, we made a split, like almost a physical split in the assessment between a management component and a performance component. So typically the management component looks at strategies, policies, disclosures around ESG, including the governance. So who within the organization is responsible for example, implementing those strategies or making sure that they are effectively implemented. And it really gives sort of the an assessment or an idea of how well the company has embedded ESG considerations into those strategies, including leadership. If we look at the performance component, that's where we look at implementation actions, where we can also see how effectively those policies are being implemented. And of course, we also look at performance outcomes with a specific focus on environmental performance indicators. So that's where we look at energy consumption within the portfolio, greenhouse gas emissions, water and waste. And we look at a number of criteria or metrics there. So first of all, we look at how well do you cover those data points? So are you able to report the metrics of your total floor area that you own and manage within your portfolio? Secondly, we look at what are the changes year on year. So are you able, as Christina showed, to reduce energy and water consumption, reduce carbon emissions, and reduce waste streams? And thirdly, we look at to what extent have you set targets in terms of further reducing those forward-looking targets, and are those targets aligned, for example, with science-based targets or not? So again, management is really about strategy, policy, leadership. Performance is about actions, impacts, and outcomes. And by applying those two dimensions, we can see more or less who is walking the talk and who's either just walking or who is just talking. I hope that answers the question.
I see another nice question that we have received, which is a question that we often get asked, which is, in terms of standing assets, can the very office we work in count as a standing asset? So the boundaries that define the portfolio that is to be reported to GRESB is the investable portfolio. This means that every asset that is under management and under the investment of the company, which is also investable by the investors that would later on use the GRESB data, has to be included. The office of the company in itself is not a revenue generating asset. So in this case, it should not be included in the GRESB assessment.
I can also see an incoming question on how GRESB results can be applied or linked to green bonds. Green bonds, perhaps not so much, but green loans and sustainability-linked loans, definitely. And let's keep that that question for the second panel.
Thank you very much, Ruben and Christina. I'll move ahead to the panel now. Thank you. So it's an absolute privilege to have such a distinguished group of speakers to join us and represent the Asian region here. I'd just like to ask each of them to provide a short introduction to their own organizations. So one of the advantages of having the virtual event is that we can have organizations join from around the world, and they may be less familiar with some of the Asian names than people who are based in the region. Ellie, would you like to quickly share about New World Development?
Sure, thank you, Ben. Really happy to be here sharing at the GRESB panel. My name is Ellie Tang, and I look after sustainability at New World Development. So New World Group is a listed conglomerate based in Hong Kong with operations in Greater China. Our core business is in property development, and we work on projects ranging from residential, commercial, retail, and public space. We also have different businesses such as in construction, in infrastructure, retail, healthcare, and hospitality around the world. So ESG integration has been something that we've been working very hard on, and I'm happy to discuss further during our panel.
Thank you. And Feng Lu, would you like to share about CITIC Capital?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Ben. My name is Feng Lu. I'm Managing Director with CITIC Capital's Real Estate Group, and a company established in 2002, and our real estate business started in 2005. Currently, the company manages 30 billion plus AUM, and we have 100 plus fund structures. So we are an alternative asset management company with a focus of private equity, real estate, structural finance, and public. And our real estate business has grew from 2005. Currently, we had $2.5 billion US AUM with more than 400 million square meter of assets. And the value is about close to 10 billion US dollars. Our participation in GRESB started in 2012, and we have been steadily improving because our reporting entity was a retail property investment fund. So I would like to participate this panel and share and learn from each of the panelists and the guests regarding our practice and their practice in the GRESB aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Feng and Ellie. So it's great to have such a long-standing GRESB participant joining. If I can turn to Boon Kang. So ARA became an investor member last year, and we've asked Boon Kang to share a couple of slides because ARA is a sort of more complex operation in some respects in terms of real estate. Boon Kang, over to you.
All right, thanks, Ben. Good afternoon to everyone. Please allow me to give a brief introduction about ARA. Next slide, please. ARA was founded in 2002 between John and Chong Kong, and it has grown into a leading real estate fund manager with 110 billion in gross assets under management. So ARA, we manage both listed and unlisted REITs, private real estate equity and credit funds, infrastructure funds in 20 countries with more than 1,200 employees. As part of the investor operator model, ARA operates a real estate management service division with local teams to manage the assets globally. Built on a foundation of strong corporate governance and business integrity, ARA counts some of the world's largest pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, financial institutions, endowment family offices as our investors. Next slide, please. ARA has made ESG an integral part of the business. In asset acquisitions, management, operations, our vision is to make a positive impact to our stakeholders with sustainable thoughts and actions. Our mission is to be a responsible fund manager to create long-term value for investors, take care of our employees, and contribute to communities. We are pleased to announce that ARA has been awarded the Best Sustainable REIT Fund Manager in Asia Pacific 2020 by CFI, which is a UK-based publication. We are also pleased to report ARA's managed private funds and REITs has performed well in GRESB this year. For example, Suntec REIT has attained a 5-star GRESB rating in its inaugural participation. Another of our private fund, ARA China Investment Partners, has achieved the highest score in the peers group and is rated the regional sector leader for diversified office retail in Asia. So from 2017, ARA has been an active participant in GRESB, and we continuously upgrade the quality of our assets under management, which is reflected in the improved GRESB scores over time. On other sustainability related matters, ARA secured a total of 1 billion green bonds for our private funds and REITs in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Australia. We also developed an ARA property DNA structure, which deepens our understanding of our building sustainable attributes and benchmarks against other peers in the industry. This helps our internal policies and procedures to implement best-in-class practices as we continue to expand our sustainability efforts across our business going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that sharing, Boon Kang. Just a couple of reflections on the comments that were made in the results presentation earlier. One of the observations is that if we look at the Asia compared to global, of course, Asia is scoring very well compared to the global average. But one of the specific areas where Asia is actually coming in lower than the Asian average is on this question of data monitoring and verification. And so that's really one of the issues that we wanted to pick up on today. We've sort of got questions around data availability, and then also not just the availability, but how to overcome any related challenges, then how to interpret data, and finally how to improve performance. So I wonder if Oh, and I should add, by the way, we do of course have this question about the Hong Kong 2050 target, but I imagine our panelists will have something to share about that, but perhaps we can just sort of bring out responses to this question about the 2050 target during your broader comments on data availability and challenges and what to do about it. So to start with, Ellie, if I can turn to you, how easy are you finding it to obtain data from different areas and across the range of
experience? We started participating in GRESB since about 4 years ago. And in the first year, and this was before we had set up a centralized database and really understood the materiality of different ESG parameters across our diversified businesses. It definitely wasn't easy. And it was not just about, filling data gaps. And I think, before we even dig into data, I think building awareness internally and on a strategic level, whether it's on the senior management level or the sustainability management level, to understand what kind of data really tells a story about the company's performance and its progress in ESG integration should be decided first and foremost before diving into data. But in terms of data availability, this is art and science. I usually like to describe it this way because certain data or specific parameters like energy or breakdown of water data would depend on having hardware or different systems to extract data from the assets. While other data points are required, say for example, the GRESB management aspect has more to do with understanding the social aspect, the supply chain. So regardless of which part of data you're looking for, first and foremost, we have to decide what is the most material part of our ESG initiative. And secondly, is the awareness up to par to help the stakeholders from whom you'll be collecting data enough, or if there should be more capacity building.
Thank you. So Feng, Ellie's sort of made some interesting points there, not just data, but the story. Is that an experience that you share, or your assets are a little bit more retail oriented, perhaps a little bit more similar to each other? Has it been easier for you to obtain data and good data coverage?
We actually, our investment vehicle for the reporting of GRESB survey was focused on the retail assets. And because we started at the very beginning of fundraising and acquiring seed investments, and then gradually over the years, the portfolio grows into 4 large-scale shopping malls across China. Therefore, the data collection is really from project to project and different from the early fund investment life into the later stage of fund investment life, because the technology or the existing condition asset differs from each other dramatically. For example, we had a project back in Changsha we acquired in 2011, and it's a sort of a bad assets, but we managed to turn into the operational mall. So the data has become a necessity for measuring each year's mall performance in terms of energy, water consumptions, and waste consumption, so on, disposals. But later on, we learned from this particular project, and as subsequent investment projects, we build up certain data collecting system, either manually or sometimes it become automatic. And then it up to this stage, the data has become more or less stabilized and more sort of a comprehensive. in terms of the retail asset operation information. And so actually our performance that's translating into our performance in the GRESB is actually really taking shape 3 years ago, when all these data become more and more comprehensive and healthy and rich. And now it's come to a stage we have to systematically further evaluate and to see which latecomers, the more, I mean, will benchmark against the previous ones, and then where are the room of improvements. So that's the stage we are in right now. So I hope that answers some of the questions, Ben.
Yes, thank you very much. And we're already touching on that question of interpretation. Boon Kang, for yourself, I mean, with this sort of disparate portfolio of assets, how have you found the data collection challenge?
Well, our strength is we have an investor operator model. That means to say that we are generally appointed both the asset and the property managers for the properties that we manage. So with support from tenants and stakeholders, we are able to progress in terms of obtaining the environmental, social, and governance data for analyzing and reporting. So specifically environmental data, we need to distinguish carefully between the common and tenanted areas, because the properties, they have units that sub-meter, for example. But having said that, we do experience situations where certain data is unavailable. That mainly relates to utilities data for tenants who either engage the private retail energy service provider themselves, or importantly, they're under master lease agreements. So the reason for not sharing such environmental data is usually due to tenants' concerns around the privacy of such information. And that's where we tend to see more coming from tenants in Asian countries. So to encourage them to share this information and data, the ARA's approach is to actually explain to tenants our overall sustainability purpose and aims to improve the efficiency of the buildings, which then in turn help to reduce the operating costs for the tenants. So to this end, we have received many positive responses, and then thereby we are able to improve the availability of data over the years. So fingers crossed, next year, probably we could participate in another of our logistics REITs with tenants under master leases. And that had been a challenge for us over the years, but we could do that, achieve reporting in GRESB perhaps next year. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. So I think I'm hearing this sort of common thread there, which is stakeholder engagement. If you can't get data, you need to improve stakeholder engagement. And then also the warning from Ellie that you need to make sure that the data that you want is going to be material. We heard a little bit about energy specific all comments to make either on water or health and safety. Ellie, we were having an interesting...
Yeah, I am happy to make a comment about that. Actually, it's more than just, energy or health and water and health and safety. I was paying attention to the sharing of GRESB results this year, and there's some interesting findings and discrepancy among different environmental parameters disclosure. And it was quite obvious that there's a dip when it comes to the waste performance disclosure around the world, meaning, the respondents like us also find it challenging to extract waste data from operation sites and disclose publicly. And I think this has to do with a couple of reasons, just tying back to the question about data availability, because as we see around the world, especially in Asia, the awareness around waste management is rising year after year. And we're seeing different city level governments, just in Greater China within the past, 1 or 2 years, Shanghai and Guangzhou, Beijing, all the first tier cities, one after another, are rolling out their waste management regulation. And they're all similar, but different, meaning every city has different waste streams and different mandates for recycling percentage, disposal mechanism, and so forth. So depending on the location of your asset, the sort of top-down approach of data collection may or may not work, and there has to be some fine local insights, and whether the required data from the group level or the asset manager level actually speaks to the operation sites. And regarding health and safety, I think this is a very interesting one, because supply chain I think will be definitely a key theme going forward, as more of the asset owners, asset managers are looking into setting science-based targets or even declaring carbon neutrality ambition. So inevitably, we'll have to look into the indirect impact or suppliers' performance. So health and safety is not just about recording our own direct employees' risk or injuries or fatalities, but really understanding how our contractors, subcontractors, and our material providers are faring, and how their companies are doing in terms of ESG. So I think there's a very interesting ripple effect from just one company being serious about ESG. It actually helps the whole supply chain.
Thanks. Yes, I think that's a sort of a pretty critical message, and one of the things that I think gives us hope in this time that ripple effect does come through. We've already started there, sort of shifting in a sense into this question of interpreting data, and Feng Liu, I wonder if I can sort of turn to you about that. How should we be interpreting the data that we've been gathering? You already said, well, what if we've got newer malls that, how should we compare those? And how do we compare those in a year like this, where particularly in retail, for 2 months of the year, traffic stopped, and that's going to mess with the figures. So can you help us find some light?
That's a very interesting question, Ben. As I just mentioned in the first question, all mall actually coming online at a different stage with a different nature. Some of them actually is education, retrofitting, and some of them actually are greenfield build, ground up. So and they had different sizes, scales. The largest one is close to 200,000 square meters. The smallest one is only 35,000 square meters. So how we do this kind of a wide range of scale and extract data and then make a benchmark comparison on the
What an absolute shame. We seem to have had an IT question that's slightly, well, maybe he can come back. Boon Kang, do you mind if I turn to you? Same question.
I'm sorry, I think I just dropped, somehow I'm off.
You did, but you've come back quickly enough. Go for it.
Yeah. And but we have this sort of an initial plan of setting up the tabulate everything from the fourth mall to the first mall to the fourth mall. And by comparing absolute data, also by looking at sometime the intensity, the unit square meter consumption data. And then that gives a certain sort of a comparison between between different years and between different malls. And there was an incident that I did compare two of a similar scale mall, one from modification, one from ground up. And we did spot certain discrepancies, and that helped us to discover certain issues with those the previous malls. What's going on? Why all of a sudden there was a stabilized mall, there was a discrepancy or a variation in certain period of the year. It goes unnormal. So it does help us spotting things. On the other aspect is we each year set up this budget for the next, and then we make a reference to the previous performance in energy, water consumption, and so on and so forth. And then we set certain target for the coming year. And fortunately, we were in a sort of upper hill for most of the malls, but we do realize that the curves start to flattening out, meaning stabilizing. And we have in the process implement several energy saving measures each year, given within each year's capex budget. But we do realize the data start to stabilize, and that will come to a state that we have to think big, make some drastic implementation or introductions of certain new technologies. So, but in a way, this data interpretation from both from absolute or from the relative and all from the intensity aspect, it all help us to achieve a better performance, meaning saving cost in each subsequent years into the operation. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Feng Lu. So critical for setting investment budgets. And Kun Kang, I wonder if we can ask the same question about interpreting in comparison.
Well, interpreting data is always a very interesting topic, because at ARA we cover a wide range of assets across different industries and different classes, which includes office, retail, industrial, logistics, convention. Even within the same asset class, the consumption and intensity varies. So a very good example is in the case of an asset we have in Australia. We saw a 30% increase in the water consumption, and we found that it's due to 40 water booster pumps, which the problem was resolved during the regular maintenance checks. So to compound the increase in water consumption was the biannual water tank draining and cleaning activity that took place. So we track and interpret the data, especially outliers data, carefully on a regular basis to make sure we are on track to achieve our sustainability target from the properties. So notwithstanding all this one-off situation. So perhaps another interesting observation we can share, it could be due to the tenant mix and consumption pattern. For example, in one of our commercial properties in Singapore, where we have more financial and media companies that require high energy intensity facilities like trading floors, servers, data storage that operates round the clock. So we saw a substantial increase in the energy intensity consumption. So under such situations, we would have to carefully normalize the reported intensity for our own internal reporting and tracking purpose. So another thing we find that we need to manage is as our asset base continue to grow for our REITs and funds, where they continue to acquire more assets. That means to say that across different time periods, we have different assets that contribute to overall consumption and intensity. So our approach is to set a very solid baseline year, and then we can continue to assess assets across the time frame. And then when new assets are then added to the fund or REITs, they have to be tracked accordingly. So, but most importantly, the methodology that we adopt to interpret data and then compare data across time periods and different assets have to be consistent, logical, and the data itself must have integrity. That means the data must be accurate and complete. Maybe I'll touch a bit on COVID, because the impact on COVID is really unprecedented, and it poses a lot of challenges for ARA as asset and property managers. So on ESG, well, if you compare data across the years, and whether to be able to arrive at a meaningful comparison against 2019, so we haven't got the full year data for our assets yet, but we'll be expecting a decrease, obviously, in environmental consumption as a result of the lockdown, as well as the business closures. So we are in the midst of assessing the impact, but some of the things we would look is to normalize the data against certain benchmark like footfall in the retail malls, occupancy rates, so that we can arrive at a meaningful comparison. That's
how particularly when the 2020 numbers are so volatile. Still, I wonder if we can switch to a different, sort of the next phase, we've got this data now. We're in interpretations to improve that data and performance. And I wonder, Ellie, if I can turn to you, and if I may, to include 2 audience questions in your response. So one is, I know you're sitting in Hong Kong, I feel that really it's time to answer this question about the 2050 Hong Kong target. And how is Hong Kong going to actually meet that in the real estate sector? And then there's also a best practice in tenants data question, which is specifically to you. So if you wouldn't mind picking up on that, thank you.
Sure, thanks for the questions. I think it might make more sense to take the question about practice in collecting tenants' data first. To be quite frank, I don't have a best practice, and I'm always open to hearing anyone's input and experience sharing for a couple of reasons. And this does vary by location. I think a lot of the asset managers in the audience probably share similar challenges in the sense that we can get access to the common area and the core and shell building data. But when it comes to tenant data, it varies by market. So for example, in mainland China, we have found that in some instances in commercial and retail properties, it may be easier to get energy data breakdown in terms of tenanted versus common areas. Whereas in Hong Kong, traditionally, it's been a bit more difficult. But having said that, we have tried different methods, and this is still work in that systems breakdown to understand the energy consumption in terms of, say, the chiller unit versus the lifts and other appliances of the building. Another more manual way, but also very valuable in terms of building deeper and longer term tenant-landlord relationship, I should say, is via our voluntary sustainable tenancy pledge. So this pledge was launched about 2 years ago, and it's applied to our office tenants as well as our retail mall tenants. The idea is that in addition to building certified green buildings in terms of the design, we want to ensure the long-term operation is sustainable as well. And as we are basically reducing impact through the landlord side's operation, we want to share these practices with our tenants. So we bring up this pledge in the early leasing discussion, and we offer them design advice to optimize how they could possibly fit out their tenanted area in a certified green building to save energy and save cost in the long run. And for the longer term operation, how do they go about engaging their employees to make sure their operation is green and healthy and energy efficient as well. And waste management, going back to this headache of many of us, we have different waste management services in place, and especially in shopping malls. This may not be the case for other global regions, but in Greater China, as e-commerce is becoming more popular, we're seeing more and more F&B tenants in the shopping mall. So what Boon Kang was sharing earlier is actually a challenge that we share, as there are more energy intensive tenants in the building, then the landlord has to basically work hand in hand with the tenants to reduce their impact and provide guidance. So the Sustainable Tenancy Pledge is our more manual way of doing so. And the second question about Hong Kong's, just announced
Ellie, do you mind
edition.
just one little, sorry, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we're coming to the end of the time. So would you mind also making this your closing remark? And then Feng Lu and Boon Kang, I'll switch to you with your closing remark. And if you feel like throwing in the question that we discussed about what smart investors should also be asking of you, that would also be great.
Yeah, so maybe I'll take that question first. I think what smart investors should look at would be the ESG parameters that are material to a company's their everyday business, instead of expecting a company to cover all bases of all different reporting frameworks. It's about consistency and really telling a story that is representative of the business. So this is how we define ESG integration. So as far as Hong Kong's carbon neutrality goes, I think it's still too soon to speak in terms of what the concrete roadmap would look like, but I understand there are different voices in our community, about the government relying too heavily on sectors, including the real estate sector, to decarbonize, while there hasn't been a clear target announced to decarbonize our grid yet, our electricity generation. And I think another point about carbon neutrality, because Hong Kong obviously jumped on the bandwagon, and this is great news to all of us Hong Kong residents, but apart from us, we're also seeing other countries and leading companies recently announcing their carbon neutrality plan. I think globally there has to be some sort of consensus or agreed opinion about where do we draw the line, like how much of our own impact do we have to reduce before we look into carbon neutrality. Otherwise, everyone can just go and purchase offsets without really looking at their own performance improvement. And that's not something we want to do. That's basically greenwashing. So with Hong Kong, I think this is a very optimistic and hopeful announcement from the government, and real estate sector obviously is a key contributor to all things sustainability, not only just emissions. I would expect to see more guidance around not only certifying new buildings as green buildings, but monitoring the operational emissions in among the existing buildings. And also in terms of the indirect emissions for building materials and tenant emissions.
Thank you, Ellie, for that sharing. And Feng Lu and Bun Kang, if I can ask you for some brief closing remarks and perhaps what smart investors should look for.
Okay, I'll go first, Bun. I think our experience in the past few years with the GRESB actually did teach us quite some of the lessons and the experiences, because from this reporting vehicle, we were actually kind of bottom up. We took data from the later stage, we start to making the corporate level behavioral change by implementing or in the management. And where we are now did appeal to some of the investors into our new investment products. So, and also we learned probably for the next subsequent investment vehicles, this ESG approach will have to take the other way around, meaning the top-down approach. Set the frame, then set up these properties in a systematic way, and these will become a more comprehensive and systematic approach in terms of collecting data, in terms of policy implementation. And because this global ESG policy is really also an evolving process, so we really need to take a top-down approach in the future in terms of ESG principle implementation. That's what my take from this practice.
And Bun Kang, please forgive me if I ask you to give a brief closing thought. Thank you.
Okay, so perhaps I just want to just address a little bit on what should smart investors be asking in terms of ESG performance, because we get that type of questions quite often, to be honest. So I think investors should actually ask the question, what are the material ESG factors for a REIT or private fund? It's very important, because when it's a material factor, that is where the REIT or the fund should focus in terms of driving the sustainability efforts towards. And then next, investors should also ask about policies, practices, performance, and that's where we talked about data earlier, making sure that data is accurate and part of target setting and how you measure your performance against the target. So all in all, it's very important that the REITs or the funds reporting its sustainability results rely on any particular recognized framework. It could be GRESB, could be GRI, so long the framework is practiced and being applied consistently, and with support from senior management and the board, and that will then lead to a very good sustainability journey to walk, together investors and to gain their confidence and to make sure they understand. Like for instance, the ARA, we have a long-standing commitment to sustainability. So that's where we need to gain the investors' trust and make sure they believe in us, and then we continue our relentless efforts on this front. That's all I have, Ben.
Well, it just remains for me to thank you very much indeed, all of you. Strong focus there, steer from focus on material issues, and I think all of you saying from the ground up with senior level buy-in and top down, sorry, not from the ground up, top design systematically at the beginning and top down. Thank you very much. And Ruben, I'll hand over to you for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, panelists. You were truly on fire. And as a consequence, because it was fascinating, we're running a bit over, but that's okay. What I asked the next panelists to turn on their mics and webcams, I'll very, very shortly introduce them. First, we have Ms. Yunmi Young, who's from Sustainable Finance Global Corporate Banking at OCBC. Thanks for joining. We have all the way from the Netherlands, Mr. Thijs Schoenaker, Direct Private Real Estate Asia Pacific at PGGM. And last but certainly not least, from Japan, Mr. Koki Fukui-san, Department Director, Real Estate Finance Department, Development Bank of Japan, DBJ. Thank you all for joining. As said, that was truly a very insightful panel to learn more about ESG management practices, both challenges and, as we've heard, some of the opportunities. I would like to know, and perhaps starting with Yumi, we've heard about the net transition as a bank or commercial lender. What do your programs or policies look like in zero carbon?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Yunmi. I'm from OCBC Sustainable Finance team. So we are OCBC is a regional bank headquartered in Singapore, and Sustainable Finance team is a dedicated team working with our corporate clients in advising them on green sustainable finance transactions such as green bonds and green loan and sustainability-linked finance. So to answer your questions on how we are looking at all this ESG performance for from the property companies, to be very honest with you, I don't think we I mean we're actually starting the whole sustainability journey. It's a fairly new thing for us, so we're learning. We're taking really baby steps in understanding the real implication of this ESG data and performances on our loan book. However, we do recognize that it's really important to support the sustainability journeys of the companies and property sector, especially to make sure that our society is stable, and also we are also deepening relationship with the companies who will be future ready. And sustainability is really a key factor that we look at to identify the companies to really that we believe that they will thrive in the future. Perhaps I'm gonna stop here to, or share, do you want me to speak about the transactions? I think it's a bit detailed, right? I'll stop here perhaps.
I mean, it's all about sharing this panel, so please do go ahead. I mean, I think that's the cream on the pie, because we did receive some questions around, so how do these green loans and transaction work, and how do you use the data? I mean, take it away.
Right. So sharing a bit more tangible examples on how we are actually leveraging on the your efforts in getting this GRESB ratings. We, as an example, we use the GRESB rating report as a sustainability benchmark when we do a sustainability linked transactions. So Ruben shared some of the transactions. We've done that too. So we recently did the sustainability linked loan with Linkrit, for example. We used the GRESB scores, so actual numbers, as an annual targets. We also did another sustainability linked loan with Capital Land. And there was a question about how we are using it for green bonds or green loan. For just a quick refresher, green bonds and green loans are debt facilities, debt securities that where the companies are saying, with this money, I'm gonna only finance green assets. And in building sector, it's typically a green buildings with recognized building certifications. But some companies, especially the ones that we work with, Frasers Australia, had a lot of properties. They had more than 100 properties, and it was a bit challenging for them to really track all the building certification for that particular transaction. So what we've done is we use the GRESB stars. And for those assets portfolio with the 5 stars, which means like top 20%, we recognize them as a green portfolio. And so we actually help them set up a green finance framework for their potential green bond in the future. And we also done the green loan for the other entity. So there are ways of doing it as well.
Great, excellent. So it's interesting to hear more about, let's say, the debt side of things. I would like to ask Thijs from PGM, who are obviously more on the equity side, PGM also being one of the founding members of GRESB. How do you look at, let's say, net zero transition, and perhaps more specifically, Thijs, the alignment of your investments with, let's say, decarbonization pathways? You're on mute, Thijs. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruben, for highlighting that. Yes, my name is Thijs Groenaker. I work as a director in the private real estate Asia Pacific team of PGM. PGM is a Dutch asset manager with about 230 billion of assets under management. We invest globally in all asset classes, including private real estate. Private real estate in Asia is an important portfolio for PGM, with about 3.5 billion of investments. And the major markets for us are China, Japan, Singapore, Seoul, and also Hong Kong and Australia. I would briefly like to highlight how important sustainability is for PGM. Besides being a founder of GRESB, we are a signatory to the UN PRI initiative. We also have set SDI goals to focus our sustainability investments. And we strive to reduce carbon and energy with our managers. Started that already. We are in these sustainability asset level plans. We also take into account, okay, what are the targets we believe, it starts with setting targets and what reduction you want to see over the next 5 years and over the next year to make it specific on the short, medium and longer term. If you look at the long term, to achieve net zero emissions zero carbon footprint in 2050, that's still a long way ahead of us, all of us. Where we're now looking into is as being one of the parties funding the CREM2 project to think about decarbonization pathways, not only for Europe, but also for Asia and the United States. And to be honest, we are still early in that process, but we want to include that in our sustainability plans with our managers to be on time and think about it early enough how to get there. And then I think the trick is to translate it into initiatives on the shorter and the medium term. I hope that addresses the question about net zero.
Yeah, definitely. And we did receive a question about the CREM2. So that's for those of you on this webinar that do not know, CREM stands for Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitoring. We'd be happy to provide some more information on the tool. And perhaps we can come back to that topic later, Thijs. Koki-san, of course, DBJ has also been a long-term GRESB member. We know that Development Bank of Japan both has, let's say, debt and finance, or I would say debt and equity investments into green real estate, but perhaps equally important, or if not more important, also its own green building tool or green building rating tool. Could you provide a bit more information about the tool and also how the tool aligns with, let's say, both net zero carbon as well as the important topic of resilience?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. I'm very honored to be here. So my name is Koki Fukui from Development Bank of Japan. I'm look after the cross-border real estate transactions, both equity and debt, as you mentioned. So DBJ is often described from two aspects. DBJ is as a government financial arms. So we create a stability financing over past 5 decades in the local Japanese markets, as well as we acting as a long-term investors to the global platform. So we mostly look after the LP investments in the global real estate standpoint. But these days, ESG could be a mainstream of our global business. So about your questions, in terms of the green building certifications, some of you are familiar with DBJ green building certifications, which was launched in 2011 before the Paris Agreement. So at that point, DBJ tried to visualize and support our clients who are focusing on green buildings, monitoring, and ESG activities. So we try to enhance that progress over almost decades. So today, as your report mentions, our GRESB are highly incorporated with DBJ green building certifications, and mainly Japanese lead participants are familiar with DBJ green building certifications. We believe it's not, the main reason was DBJ green building certification is more like friendliness about the users, not only focusing on the quantitative, but also the qualitative parameters should be incorporated in that certifications. So that is the natures, and we believe that is very updated, and we feel that concept is very familiar with many of the participants who try to incorporate and enhance their ESG activities. So in terms of your question about a net zero, so as an investor's point of view, in the Japanese local markets, the real estate industry is the stock business, obviously. So far in the Japanese discussions, net zero is driven by the technology and engineering standpoints, means the people prefer to make a new constructions by using new technology or innovations to achieve net zero. But from our standpoint, the mainstream should be our operating side. So we need to focusing on the more existing stock and how the people enhance and transition to achieve net zero by using their operational phases. So we try to DBJ certifications to more kind of our benchmarking type of certifications, and not a snapshot type of, to incorporate that kind of supporting the existing stock in the Japanese local markets. That's our positions.
Great, thank you. And again, also great to see the use or the adoption of DBJ's green building rating system in Asia, one of the most popular ones according to 2020 GRESB data. In terms of these asset-specific tools, so think about the green building certifications around Asia, perhaps more specifically Green Mark in Singapore, BM Plus in Hong Kong. At the asset level, but perhaps also at the organization level, or let's say the borrower level, how important are these tools for a lender like OCBC?
Sure. It was really fascinating to hear like Ellie, Guntang, and Fang really on how they're going about the ESG data collection and their challenges. To be very honest with you, bankers like us, we really don't understand how the buildings are managed in fully. So we really rely on those certifications and rating systems such as GRESB. So for us, it's really a critical data points and critical assessment that we can actually leverage on for our financial transactions. I believe as a financier, our role is not to really more like we are here to understand what you are doing, and then we're here to give you support and incentives to really justify your efforts, because it's a real effort. So to answer your question, they are really really critical support tool for us, and that's why I think the property sector has been a real leader in sustainable finance transactions or sustainable finance market out of this region.
Thank you. That's great to know. Thijs, back to you. In terms of, obviously, with direct investment, you have also direct engagement with your managers, and probably you're able to influence some of their practices and outcomes. To what extent does the business case around sustainability play a role when you make investment decisions or when you engage with those managers? Where for PGM is the green premium? Is it more about managing risks in relation to environmental, social governance issues, or is it also looking at the opportunities that those?
In the end, you know, what are our participants of the Dutch pension funds expect is, first of all, healthy financial returns on our investments. So that's still for most the first goal. Secondly, sustainability is very important to PGM and to our clients and the society. They expect us to invest into a sustainable world. So sustainability is a key topic when having interactions with our managers. And yes, it's then always the challenge, how much are you going to invest to make an asset more sustainable? But on the long run, we believe it pays off. It's more and more being appreciated by the end users, the tenants. It's being appreciated by investors. So it helps driving also the value and the return of the asset. So on the longer term, we believe it go hand in hand, financial sustainability returns. And to mention for us, climate change is also one of our important themes within PGM. We focus on, for real estate, specifically focusing on physical and transition risk. And an interesting project we have undertaken, we started a few years ago, is with Munich Re to set up a GIS, geofying information system for mapping the data on our assets. Where are our assets globally? What kind of environment? What are for us the climate risks? How do these assets score in terms of climate risk, and what kind of mitigants can we put in place with our managers? So yeah, it's definitely an important topic, sustainability. We regularly discuss it, and yeah, it's as I mentioned earlier, part of the asset level plans.
That's great. Thank you, Thijs. Being very conscious of time, perhaps a last question, and also my request to you to keep it brief. We just asked the previous panel what smart investors should be asking about ESG performance by the managers. As I consider you all to be very smart investors, who of course engage also with smart managers. My question to you, very briefly, what should smart managers focus on regarding ESG practices over the coming years? And perhaps you start with Koki-san.
Yes, thank you for the questions. So as I mentioned before, when we look at the net zero world, the transition is our key things, we believe. So we would expect the manager have to look at the transitional phases by their operations. So someone easy to take new buildings by technology driven, but the new type of manager have to look after the monitoring phases. That I would say.
That's great. That's great. That sounds indeed like a very sensible and smart manager if you get that one right. Thijs, back to you.
Yes, I believe smart managers, they should focus to further improve and set up data analytics. So the first step, of course, is to get access to the data. That can be challenging, but then to really get value out of it, invest in data analytics and use that in your management of your sustainability in the portfolio, and preferably at the asset level, so that you really can manage climate risk and yeah, create a great sustainable assets.
Awesome, thank you. And last, but of course, certainly not least, Yunmi.
Right. I'm sorry. I actually have no brilliant idea about the smart questions to ask. But what I can tell you is, I mean, I do believe in the saying that what's measured can be managed. And as an investor, I'm hearing from my clients in property sector that they are getting more and more pressure from the investors to participate in green building or ESG rating systems such as GRESB. So I welcome them, and I'm sure the benchmark system such as GRESB will guide property investors in asking right questions, really just participating in, and your efforts will be, and hopefully will be recognized by the bankers like us, and we'll make sure that you can actually leverage fully your efforts and achievements in this whole journey.
Thank you, thank you. And I agree that what gets measured gets managed, but also what gets managed gets improved. And that's also what we see in the annual GRESB results. So very true that. Thank you very much, panel. This was a really very insightful session. And now back to you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much, Ruben. So it remains for me primarily to thank everybody, but I'd also ask Thijs, particularly, I'm noticing that there's a couple of questions about CRREM and also PGGM. So what I'd like to do is just thank everybody and then invite everyone to stay for a sort of very quick virtual espresso and perhaps catch an answer from you on that afterwards. But for now, it's really been a fascinating discussion. I've enjoyed it very much. With a whole range of considerations, too many for me to be easily able to summarize. So I'd just like to thank everyone for making the event happen today, from our host CBRE and to GRESB colleagues, to the many investor members of GRESB, and to the many participants that submit their policies and practices and data to GRESB. We know and understand that it's a challenging exercise. And then, of course, to our panelists today, I'd like to thank each of you, Ellie Tang, Boon Kang Tang, Feng Lu, Thijs Schoenecker, Yunmi Jong, and Koki Fukui for all of your thoughts and sharing today. And then finally, if I can also thank you, the audience, for your attention. Please don't hesitate to get in touch and ask any further questions via GRESB or directly if you know any of us. Thank you. And so please feel free if you need to go, please do go. But if yes, we could just have a virtual espresso and hear from Thijs about CRRM. I'd really appreciate that for people that do have a few minutes more. So the questions were, are there any experiences using it for Paris alignment, and do you use geofeed data specifically at PGGM?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have to admit, I'm not the specialist within PGM on using geofeed data and the CREM methodology. But what I mentioned earlier is that we are building up our insights with data on our portfolio of assets globally through a geographic-based information system, that we clearly know where are our assets, what are the risks at the asset level, and how do we mitigate those. Whether or not we can use this for the CREM methodology, I believe we will, but we are still early in the process. So far, the CREM methodology, we have not applied it yet with our managers into investment programs, but our intention is to do so. And then, of course, it will be very useful that we have detailed insight into the sustainability risks and scoring of each of our assets, because to drive these decarbonization pathways, in the end, you need this asset level data. And there we also need, in the end, the support of our managers and cooperation to get this data. I hope that addresses a little bit the question.
Absolutely, thank you. And I guess potentially there's a case study there for next year, but we won't hold you to that.
Okay.
All right. I guess that's it from me. Ruben, unless you have anything final, I propose we close the session.
No, again, thank you for your questions. There are a few unanswered, but we will follow up on those questions with more specific answers, also in relation to the CREM tool, which indeed this year will be, let's say, implemented into the GRESB results. So yeah, we will definitely follow up with more explicit and comprehensive answers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.